Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to the 10th Pan-Commonwealth Forum on Open Learning, and thank you all for being here. Before I start, may I convey my heartfelt condolences to the royal family and the people of the UK and Commonwealth for the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. The 2.5 years since January 2020 had been a transformational time for all the nations represented here, irrespective of its development status. The developed countries, as well as the developing ones, were confronted with an unprecedented emergency requiring school closures for extended periods. All the countries, big and small, were thrust upon uncharted territory. How were we going to continue to provide education in these times? To make matters worse, the pandemic engendered inflation and recession. The hardest hits were developing countries, especially small island developing states like the Maldives. Though we managed to ride the bumpy pandemic waves and continued student learning without jarring disruptions, we are afraid that our vulnerability to climate changes can result in another long period of school closure. Thus, our main focus now is on learning recovery and building a more resilient education system. In this journey, we are thinking of alternative modes of teaching that can reduce the impact of disruptions, climate adaptations that can help mitigate the adverse effects on climate change, alternative financial models to finance our immediate needs and providing access to all the students to quality education despite the geographical limitations. The topic of this keynote session is building resilience. It is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Honorable Dr. Rolph Payet, former Minister of Environment and Energy, Seychelles, who has been the Executive Secretary of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions since October 2014. A fellow islander like me, Dr. Payet has a doctorate in environment science, degrees at master level in integrated coastal zone management, business administration, and applied environmental economics, and an honors degree in biochemistry. In addition to having been Seychelles' chief negotiator for Basel Convention, the Montreal Protocol, and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, Dr. Payet has also established important multi-stakeholder platforms such as the Global Island Partnership and co-chaired the International Coral Reef Initiative. He was the lead author for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, third and fourth assessments, and was elected as Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society in 2007 in recognition of his contributions to marine research. Dr. Payet established the first university in Seychelles in 2009, served as its Vice Chancellor for several years, and also co-developed UNICEF's first bachelor's degree in environmental sciences. He also holds an associate professorship at the University of Linnaeus in Sweden. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Rolph Payet.
Thank you very much, Minister, for this introduction. Wonderful good morning to you, and thank you for our host for being here in Calgary. It's a beautiful city. I wish we would have had time to go out in the prairie and see the mountains, but that's maybe for another time. And thank you, Professor, for inviting me this morning to this important presentation, which I think it's the most fundamental issue in regards to our civilization today, and that is resilience. We can build buildings, develop technology, but if we don't have resilience, I don't think we will survive. And I think people survived COVID-19, those that survived it, including all of us here, is because of this level of resilience that we have. So today I will take you on a journey which is both personal but also experiential in a way, but I will not be technical, so I promise you I won't put you to sleep, because if I were to talk about my organization, we deal with chemicals and waste and very complex stuff, and I was reflecting whether I would talk to you about this morning, and I said, no, I'm not going to put you through the hard work of trying to figure out exactly what we do in these 3 conventions, but I will touch on this a bit later on. So I will talk a little bit about what has happened to resilience learning. And I think it's very important that we do have a reflection on this. Are we training our kids today, our young adults today, or even the adults to be resilient, or we just empowering them for a new job, whether an engineer, a doctor, an environmental scientist, a veterinarian, which my young 10-year-old daughter wants to be, or whether we're building her up to be resilient. And many of you who are also sitting on recruitment panels nowadays, when we look at the hundreds of great CVs we receive, we're not looking at not only the education, but we're looking at the abilities, to work in a team, the abilities for them to communicate, the abilities for them to be, providing solutions to issues. These are the skills that the top employers of this world is looking for. Google, I'm sure, get thousands of people with advanced degrees, PhDs, 5 PhDs in computer science. But are they looking for only those kinds of skills? No, I think they're looking for much more, and most of us know that. And this is where I think we enter into this area of trying to build resilience. And so I will also look at 2 approaches that we've adopted in my organization on lifelong learning and online learning, and trying to build this kind of resilience. So I'll use examples from the existing organization that I work for. I'll look at online learning for sustainability, because I think for me this is fundamental to anything that we're going to learn today. And as you know, all the sciences, all the thinking, whether in philosophy, in the sciences, emanated from the environment around us, from the markets that were created around us, the minerals that we found in the earth. Everything is from actually that we've developed from our minds, and our knowledge comes from the experiences that we've had around us. So that's, I think, important to have this discussion on the link between online learning and sustainability. And finally, I want to share with you some of my own take-home messages. So let's get on it. So what do these 2 indigenous youths have in common? And here we have a young Inuit woman from Canada, where we are here, and then we have a young Aborigine boy from Australia, which, as you know, is a very different environment from what we experience here in the Arctic Circle. And these 2 children will be born. They've already grown up as the photo, but you know what I'm trying to say. They were born in totally different environments. And they will have, each of them, thousands of years of traditional knowledge to acquire as they grow up. Why do they need this traditional knowledge? I think the first thing is one of survival. If I take this Aboriginal boy and put him in a plane and take him to the Arctic Circle without conveying or transferring any traditional knowledge to him, I don't know, how long do you think he will survive in the winter? And if I take this Inuit woman and put her on a plane as well and send her to Australia in the outback and release her in the wild without this traditional knowledge, how long do you think she will survive? We all know they won't survive very long. And the reason for this is education. Now, we're talking the last 5 days, or in all the conferences that we go to, about technology, about internet access, about tablets, computers, Raspberry Pis, and technology, and the psychology of education. Fine, fantastic. This is great, because this is the progress that we've been able to do in the last 100 or so years in learning about how people learn, in learning about conveying messages, in learning about how the brain works, how knowledge is retained, how knowledge is passed on, the different styles and methods of teaching. We've seen when we were kids, we learned maths in a different way. Now when my kids come home, they told me, no, Dad, this is not the way you learn maths. You learn it this way, because we've learned a lot about how the human brain and how the human senses responds to learning. And although we've learned a lot, we seem to have forgotten the most basic of things. And this is what I want to share with you today, is those basic of things need to be reinforced in our learning, in our teaching, in our sharing. And learning starts as soon as the baby is born, believe it or not, right? We agree with that. As soon as the baby is born, learning starts, because the baby has to learn to speak, to walk, and then we build upon this, the different learning layers. And this is what happens to those two kids at the extreme and remote parts of the world. Their learning process starts when they are very, very young, because if they don't, they will not survive. They will not survive. They have to learn how to adapt to changing weather conditions. They have to learn to identify which plants are edible or not. They have to learn how to hunt, how to gather. They have to learn even in some, if you look at the Aborigines, for example, for thousands of years, they've learned to read the stars in the skies. They've learned to develop a map of the terrain. It's amazing when you read the story, the anthropological story of the Aborigines, how they've been able to survive in such extreme environments. As you probably know, in Australia, we have one of the highest number of poisonous animals running around, and if you don't know which one, you're likely to meet your fate. So I just wanted to send the first message here this morning that learning, lifelong learning, has existed since the foundations of our civilization, since we start learning to walk. So what we need to do today is to reinforce this. And what has happened, and this is on my next slide, is we have become compartmentalized. We have put ourselves in little boxes. This nice box here. Now where's the, okay, you can see the houses here. We've evolved, we've progressed, we've updated ourselves. We now live in houses where the running water comes in, where the wastewater goes out, where we wake up in the morning, once a week we put out the rubbish, and we don't ask questions. Where does the water come from? Where does the electricity come from? Where does the internet come from? Where does our waste go to? How many of you, please be honest with me, your kids ask you, where does my waste that I've generated go to? Where do they end up? Right? No kid asks this question. And I'm sure the adults don't ask this question either. And this is one of the biggest challenges I have in my job, is communicating to adults and to the young people alike, is where do you think your waste goes to? And I hope you all know the answer, because the answer is quite shocking, in fact. Some of your waste ends up in Africa. It ends up in Asia, where young kids play in it, burn it, use it for fuel to cook their own food because they cannot find food. And you have all these toxic chemicals leaking into the environment, which then ends up into the oceans and is taken up by fish, by algae, or contaminates rivers. And even in the atmosphere, it travels thousands of miles. And for years, we've been measuring these chemicals in the polar bears, for example, because the polar bears are very remote. We've been measuring them in remote islands because they are so far away from these kinds of beautiful cities. And what we've noticed is there's a buildup of these chemicals in the bodies of these children, of the mothers, which means that the chemicals that we are generating, the waste that you're generating in the house, in all those beautiful, nicely organized urban areas where we take things for granted, actually travels thousands of miles. And the problem is they don't stay in those islands and in the polar bears. They come back to our own homes. With plastics, for example, we're now measuring plastics in the atmosphere. Can you imagine that? The National Geographic did a study on water. They went, National Geographic travels all over the place. They go into deep cave diving, up the mountain, picking up snow. They go in all these remote places, and you see all these nice photos. Now they've been collecting water from all over the world, the most remote parts of the world, and all of them contain plastic. The bottled water, which I have here, I challenge you, take it to the lab, and you will find plastics in that water here. You cannot see it with your eyes, but it's got plastic in it. That is where we are today. That's the state of our civilization today. Now, some people will tell you this is rubbish, there's no climate change, there's no pollution. Just take the bottle, stick it under a microscope, and then tell me whether we as humans have been sensitive to the environment. And now we heard yesterday when we saw the indigenous people here sharing their story and the prayer by the elder. In his prayer, the most central message was nature, how they interfaced with nature, how they respected nature. And what has happened in the last 100 years or so is we've disconnected our children. We've disconnected the generations from the things that matter, and that is nature. They no longer know where their fruits and their vegetables and their food on their plates come from. They no longer know where the energy that they waste so much, and we keep on telling them, switch off the light, do not waste energy. They do not know where it comes from. They do not know where their waste goes. We need to open their eyes, and this is where we will build resilience. Because once they see the comfort of four walls, they get a bus that takes them to school every day, they will never build resilience. They need to understand, they need to make this connection, colleagues. And this is where we are failing in whatever learning we're trying to pass on. And this is why those civilizations, like I gave, the Inuits and the Aborigines, why they were able to survive all those years, because their system of education didn't have high-tech, didn't have online learning. But they were tackling the core, which is building resilience as soon as the child hits the ground. And for me, that's fundamental, and it's so important if we want to address resilience. So what has happened to resilience learning then? We have turned it from practical to theoretical. And this is a challenge, especially not only in face-to-face learning, but in online learning. How do we get the person to move away from the screen, go outside, and expose themselves to what they are learning? It's a challenge for online learning, but I think it's important, because what they see on the screen is not enough. It's not enough for them to be able to develop resilience. And here I'm not saying online learning is all good. Okay, I'm a champion of online learning, and I believe in it so strongly. But we need to add this human connection component to it. They need that connection. And there's a lot of ways we can do this. And sometimes we develop courses which are thousands of miles away. Professor Aishath sits on her desk and develops an online course for me in Seychelles, which is like 10,000 miles away. Totally different context. Now, the information she's sharing is important. Is probably on let's say we're developing a module on climate change, for example. We have all this collection of knowledge from all the libraries and all the researchers. We put it together in an online course. But then how does this person at the end of the screen interpret this in their own context? And this is a challenge for online learning and for lifelong learning. So we need to find ways of that interface. I used to spend a lot of time in my career as a negotiator for climate change with the fishermen. These guys used to fascinate me because they had so much knowledge you won't find in the books. They have so many kinds of information and thinking, sometimes wrong, sometimes very correct. But having a conversation with them was always enlightening, and I was always learning from their ability to look at the environment, look at the clouds, look at the winds, and be able to tell me the weather or how the fish are behaving and whether it's a good time now to go out and fish or not. So these are the things that we have lost. Seriously, we have lost, and our kids have lost. So again, it's very important to move from the theoretical to the practical, from the connected to the disconnected of reality. Yes, we have virtualization, well, virtual reality nowadays we can experience by walking around with those masks. The kids love it. But at the end of the day, there's nothing that replaces having to be able to connect to someone, to something. And we saw that through COVID. I was, in the 2 years of COVID, I had the ability to follow 3 meetings at the same time. So I had 3 screens and 3 online meetings. It was crazy. For the first couple of months, I was gung-ho, yeah, I don't need to travel anymore. I can be in 3 meetings at the same time. But after 2 months, I was exhausted, mentally, emotionally, and I felt I could not be as impactful as I was before. Because although technology provided me the opportunity of being in 3 places at the same time and be able to talk to people at the same time, it was not building my own resilience in terms of being impactful and also connecting. So these are, I think, important considerations. From observation to dictation. I use the word dictation here because we have a legacy in education where, for those of us from the past generation, we had to learn everything by rote. Everything we had to learn by heart and be able to recite and be able to do that. And we progress from this, and as we go older, we see that this is perhaps not the best way of learning. But it had to happen in a way that, because the way society was structured, and for you to get jobs and all this, and for you to get grades. And I'll tell you a story with my son. He's studying for his pre-university studies now. And he told me, he says, Dad, I don't need to study the whole book anymore or read it or enjoy, because I told him that studying is about enjoying and reading and learning. He said, I just need to look at the examiner's notes. That is what the examiner will be looking for in my answer to give me grades. Seriously? That's what some of the kids are doing in school now, because the examiner's report is published, and in there it looks at the examiner's notes and how they're going to correct it, what they're looking for, and that is what he is using as a measurement for his effectiveness in his studies, rather than studying and enjoying just the breadth of information and knowledge that we have at our disposal today. So that's why I'm putting this on from observation, from really sitting down and having a discussion and having an interaction and observing what's around us and then applying this knowledge. We are looking at what the examiners will be telling us. And somebody yesterday mentioned we live in a culture of not accepting failure. And I think we've learned a lot, and the research has shown us, even in organizations. I run in my organization, I have to keep on reminding my staff that failing is fine because it helps us to improve. It helps us to get better. These 5,000 years or 100,000 years or 60 or 80,000 years of these indigenous people's learning has not been based upon getting it right all the time. There were failures, and they learned from these failures, and they passed this knowledge on from one generation to another. So failure is a concept, I think, which is foreign to us. Again, I'm talking to the past generation, because my dad said, no, you cannot fail, you have to get this right. And where am I here? Okay. And I think this is something that needs to be conveyed, because by failing, we learn to be resilient. So that's the equation that I use. By failing, we learn to be resilient. And finally, and I've mentioned that before, from visualization to virtualization. Nothing that we've invented today, whether it's on the screens, whether it's in a virtual environment, can replace the visual aspect. We have 8K television today. We're going to have 12K television very soon. but nothing will replace going out and admiring these wonderful mountains that we have around here, right? You all agree with me? The kids might not agree, but I think you will agree, and probably sooner or later they will come back and take steps back and say, look, yes, I think that you were right. Just admiring the wonders of nature from the natural perspective is a lot much better. That is not to say that virtualization is not important. I have august group of professors here, scientists who are investing resources and a lot of time in using virtualization and visualization to enhance learning. And this is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this part of resilience that needs to be added to our lifelong learning and to our online learning, that we are somehow not, we are taking it for granted because of the way society is structured. So I come now to the two approaches that we have in the three conventions that I am responsible for. And I'm not going to get too technical here, but I hope you will follow me. The first one is we look at a life cycle approach to chemicals and waste. And here when I talk about chemicals, I'm talking about products. These are made from chemicals. My clothes is made from chemicals. All these materials here, they are chemical in orientation. We dig this in the ground, we melt it, and we make tables out of it. Everything, all the products that we have here that is man-made comes from a form of chemical processing and industrial processing and engineering. Okay, you're following me here. So we put it on the market, and we buy it, and we use it, and when we use it, we dump it. Yes, there's been growing recognition now that we need to do recycling, we need to do reuse, and whatever. But what if we thought about it as a life cycle? Just like nature is a life cycle, when we look at nature is part of a cycle, we think of the products that we use as part of a cycle. This, of course, then changes the whole way we look at things. The way we use energy, the way we use food, the way we use the products around us, it totally changes. And this graphic here basically shows you the products that come in and whether we can fit them within part of this life cycle. And this is basically what the three conventions attempt to do. We have the Basel conventions, which deals with waste. We have the Rotterdam conventions, which deals with chemicals, and this includes pesticides and also industrial chemicals. And then we have the Stockholm conventions, which deals with chemicals that we need to get rid of. Things like PCB, DDT. I'm sure you've heard of these chemicals, right? They don't belong to our planet because they are highly, highly hazardous. So this convention deals with those. And believe you me not, these chemicals are very difficult to get rid of because it has so much integrated into human society. We depend on them so much. I mean, DDT, we've been trying to phase out DDT for the last 30 years, ladies and gentlemen. In the last 2 years, WHO has and is now testing a vaccine for malaria. But believe me, it is still used in some parts of Africa to control malaria. And this is one of the worst chemicals man has ever invented. It kills much, much worse than malaria, believe me. But we're still struggling to phase it out. So this is the challenge that we have before us. Recent chemicals that have been put on the list are a group of chemicals which we call P4. Again, I won't go into the thing, but funny enough, they are found in our clothing, on the furniture. They've been added as a fire retardant. So if there's a fire here, these things won't burn as fast. Fine. It's trying to reduce the impact of fires, but the toxic elements in those accumulate in our bodies and causing cancer, causing reproductive health disorders, causing neurological disorders. And these have been found with many, many years of scientific research. But getting rid of them, you can just imagine how many years it will take for us to have this transformation, both in industry and transforming this. Now, I go a step back. The chemists that we are training today, These are the designers of the future. And here we see a growing science called what we call green chemistry. These are chemists who are being trained to think about sustainability, not just developing new products and new chemicals that are beneficial for human life, but also that are beneficial in terms of health, in terms of the ecosystem, and in terms of completing this life cycle. This is the challenge that we have before us today. These are the challenges that chemists, material chemists, and others have. And of course, universities are the primary motors of driving this. But it cannot happen if those chemists, if those young people are not connected very early in their education to health, to the environment, and to the things that we have and that are important around us. So this is just a brief overview of the work that I do, and I hope I've interested you in that work. Now, we have a network of regional centers around the world, and most of these regional centers which support implementation of this thinking and these, phasing out of those chemicals and products, they work very closely with universities. And this is something I have pushed a lot because I see that bridge between the role that universities can play in supporting change in the way we consume, in the way we deal with some of these environmental issues. And sadly, and I'm sure many of the colleagues from the universities here will tell me the disconnect between policy making and universities is still very big, even in the global north. The disconnect between what the universities are doing, what they are learning, is totally disconnected from what the politicians are saying. And we hear this every day on the news, and I did not give you any examples, but it's amazing. Those same politicians graduate from the same universities, but then they seem, when they get out there, believe me, you have been a politician before, they totally forget about the whole aspect of using the information that we have to make rational decisions, to make intelligent decisions, to make decisions that give, better health, better education, better livelihoods. And this is also a rift in building resilience, because politicians are there for 5 years. What is their interest in building resilience? So the connection between universities and policy making is vital in also building resilience. How's my time? Oh gosh, okay, I've got 2 more minutes. The other approach is one called circular economy. I'm sure you've heard about the circular economy, which means that the whole economy is tied up in a circular way, which means that we communicate to the consumer the whole price of the product, which includes its disposal or its recovery. So we send the right price signals to consumers. For example, if we added the cost of pollution and the cost of disposal to your mobile phone, will you change it every year? Will you change it as soon as a new model is up? Would you change your car every 2 to 3 years? Would you use the water and waste the water if we had we communicated the true cost to you, which includes, of course, the cost of this disposal, the cost of the wastewater treatment? How can we influence then the consumers? How can we influence industry in the way they produce? And to think about, when they produce something, can it be easily disposed of? For example, if you take a mobile phone, you probably have not thought about this before. Can you imagine how many different types of plastic there is in a mobile phone? There's not one type. How many different types of metals, polymers, different types of glass? Okay, altogether they run into hundreds different kinds of things that come together to really make a mobile phone. When it comes to recycling it, it becomes really difficult and impossible. And that's why people throw it away, because it is so complex now to start taking apart the different chemicals from it. And in fact, when they are disposed of, for example, in West Africa, the kids burn it and they extract just the gold and the silver and some of the other precious metals. And the rest is thrown away or burned into the atmosphere. And this is a big, big challenge today, which comes from the disposal of our electronic materials. What I found wrong with this, I don't know whether you've seen it before, but there's no education in there. There's no education. We talk about R&D, designers, innovators. We talk about role of industry. We talk about consumers and end users. We talk about government policies, global trade, secondary material producers, role of markets and exporters. Where's education? Where's education in this whole thing? And this is a sector, this is where I work in, right? Education is not given the important role it has in the whole aspect of trying to solve some of our biggest challenges we have today, which is climate change, pollution, biodiversity loss. Education is not found in there. So how are we going to build resilience then? And my final slide here, we have, this is a MOOC that we have. This is our contribution to the online learning. And as you can see here, we have had so far 6,000 participants participating in our EWaste. EWaste is waste coming from mobiles, computers, and all this. And as you can see, around the world, we have most participation from the Asia-Pacific region, not so much from the global north or even Africa for that matter, and that's freely available online. The slide will be available so you can have the link. But this is the thinking process we've had in developing this MOOC, is first looking at it as a global issue, looking at the impacts and solutions, and looking at links with health, and then seeing how we can reduce this through policies in business and engaging everybody. And this has education as part of this whole process of learning, because we saw and felt that education is an important component in building and developing resilience. So a few examples. And this is only to inspire you. I don't need probably to tell you, but I think it's good to inspire. In this school in India, you pay for your tuition using plastic waste. So you go and pick up the plastic waste and you pay for your tuition. Innovative, but it's inducting into the kids the importance of waste. But most importantly, students are learning at a very early age how to sort out waste. How many of our schools teach this? Very basic, doesn't cost anything, doesn't need a PhD, but how many of our schools are actually doing it? So that when they go home, they say, Mom, Dad, I need you to recycle as well. This is the positive influence. This is the resilience we can build. Second one, water harvesting in schools. Now, schools are open only during the day. And yes, some schools, maybe you have sports and whatever, but basically you can use them for the toilets and for the showers, so you can have rainwater harvesting. How many schools have rainwater harvesting projects? So we just depend on the water coming from the mains. With a water harvesting project, you actually engage the kids in the concept of water harvesting, in the concept of water conservation, because there's a lot of things that comes around it. There's a lot of education that comes around it. They set up their own little meteorological station so that they can monitor the weather. We live in a generation today where we have more tools than this Inuit girl and this Aborigine boy didn't have. We have more tools at our disposition to provide this connection that our kids, our youth need to the environment and to build that kind of resilience. So we had solar power in the schools. When I was Minister of Environment in Seychelles, I talked to the Minister of Education and the Minister of Finance. And I said, look, the schools operate during the day. I live in a tropical country where we get easily 12, yes, hours of sunshine. And the school doesn't probably need light, but needs it for computer, needs it for PowerPoint and all this. Why can't we have solar panels on all our schools? They don't need it at night, so we don't need batteries, but we can have solar panels. And we can cut the cost of electricity in the schools. We can invest. And that money that is saved over a long period of time can go towards actual education. Again, these are things you probably know, but how many of us are doing it? And through that process, you know what happens. You put a big board in front of the school and it gives you, today you've generated so many kilowatts of electricity. Today you've used so many watts of electricity. You can set targets. The kids can set targets on, but this is the kind of resilience education that we need to have. And here I'm giving not even complex, very, very simple examples. School gardens. How many of our schools have gardens? I grew up in a school that had gardens, so for me, going to a school that doesn't have a garden is very strange. Connecting the kids to their own food is something that we've lost when we've built, we built up all our societies. But I think it's important. Yes, some schools in the city might be difficult to have school gardens, but nowadays on the internet there are wall gardens. Have you seen those? Wall gardens, balcony gardens. These for me are important life skills that allow kids to develop resilience. They are simple, but their impact, I think, is long-term, is throughout their entire life. Cooking local foods. This is a group of children in Guatemala. Local foods. I was really, really amazed when we had the invasion in Ukraine, when I learned that Africa will go into famine because of wheat in Ukraine not reaching Africa. Where in Africa they have staple foods, cassava, breadfruit, plantain. But what we've become a globalized society. We look at everything in the supermarkets. We have not, as governments, and here I'm talking to governments, invested in local production of local fruits and vegetables. And we have not told our kids. My kids now, I fight with them to eat breadfruit. I grew up on breadfruit. I love breadfruit. But I fight with them because even by my own mistake, I bought things from the store which were imported. So I denied them nutrition because those things are very nutritious because they're grown from the ground in my backyard. I've denied them the choice of having and enjoying their own local food. This is what we've done to our generation, colleagues. This is irreversible disresilience, I would call it today. So by bringing it back into the schools, by bringing it back into learning, and teaching them how to cook the local food. Of course, they look at it and say, Dad, how do I cook this? How do I cut this? This looks strange. It's natural because we have not been teaching them. I think this is my last slide. So these are my take-home messages. Education is central to resilience, and I think you all agree with me. Resilience is about the implementation of knowledge, not just in a passive one way, the teacher with the kids, or following an online course. They have to be motivated and stimulated to go out and experience. Resilience is about connecting and impacting. Connecting and then be motivated to create the impact on yourself and to other people around you. Resilience is not like instant noodles. You just pour hot water in there, and 1 minute you have a meal. It takes hard work to cut a breadfruit. Agreed, Prime Minister? But the kids learn it, and then it becomes second nature. My kids now, they chop the breadfruit and they stick it. And at the beginning, they were trying, what is this? I cannot touch this. This is gluey, and this is... But as a learning process, they're better. Most important, and this I didn't talk about because of time, resilience is intergenerational. The mixing, and we saw that during COVID when the grandparents could not talk to the children. I saw it on TV, so many examples because of, the risk of infection. The children were more resistant, the elderly were more at risk. So there was this rift, and in some societies it actually, was quite serious because of this. It shows us the importance of intergenerational sharing of knowledge and religions and resilience. And finally, just as it takes a village to teach a child, to bring up a child, it also takes a village to build resilience. So I hope I've been able to inspire you. It's nothing new, no rocket science. It's just that these are the things I've picked up in my journey on resilience, and I hope I've been able to motivate you and contribute something to PCF. So thank you so much.